Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our March 2019 online webinar. I'm your host, Dr. Jessie Sanders, owner and chief veterinarian at Aquatic Veterinary Services. Today's webinar will include all information on koi health and keeping. This is intended for a more beginner view into koi, but certainly there's some things here that advanced koi keepers need to be aware of as well. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar platform, you do have a little kind of sidebar there that has a box for questions. If you want to go ahead and put your questions in there during the broadcast, I will answer them at the very end. Keep in mind my box on this side is very, very small, so try to keep your questions straightforward and to the point. So we'll be covering koi home and habitat, pond maintenance, koi health, including stress and immune function, koi nutrition, a few emerging diseases that all koi owners need to be aware of, and then we'll end with Dr. Sanders' 5 secrets to healthy koi. So starting off with koi home and habitat. For those of you who are unfamiliar with koi keeping, you may only see them in the pet store when they are very, very small. These fish can grow very large, up to 2 feet, if not more. So certainly take into consideration any home that you will be keeping your fish in needs to be of a size that they can grow into. If your pond is too small or they are in a fish tank, you can actually see stunting and spinal deformities due to the fact that they just don't have enough room to swim. Some different koi pond components that you need to be familiar with. Starting off with your filtration. Your mechanical filter is responsible for removing particulates from your water, and this can include settling tanks, matting, and sponges. Biologic filtration includes any surface area for bacteria to grow on, and it should be, this is usually in a pressurized bead filter. It can be matting, sponges, bioballs, or even plastic strapping. Any pumps that you have pumping water around your pond must be able to turn over your entire pond volume in 1 hour. We really recommend a 45-minute time period or less if you're able to accomplish that. Certainly any filtration that you have should be at capacity, if not more, for your pond size. So say you have a 5,000-gallon koi pond, we really recommend going with a 10,000 gallon filter. This is just gallons per hour filter. It doesn't have to be a 10,000 gallon filter, but it'll be able to work a lot easier and certainly is more forgiving of mistakes you make with any maintenance. Aeration, so fish, just like we do, they need oxygen to breathe. So you want to make sure that your water is mixing fairly consistently. This will allow for maximum oxygen to be able to get into your water. Most pond owners will have a decorative waterfall feature that is attached to their pond. In this little example here, you can see a small one in the bottom right-hand corner. You can also incorporate aeration with air stones. So these are porous, somewhat brick-like material that connects to an air hose that's on an air pump. So air will be pumped from that air pump into your hose and through the air stone. And using that air stone, you can diffuse oxygen into your water much better than just a standard bubble. You can also see we have a little decorative fountain that's in this pond as well. That can also add additional aeration. For those of you who have serious issues with algae, we recommend adding a UV sterilizer. Please keep in mind that your UV light isn't going to affect your fish health whatsoever, not unless they're swimming through it, and then they're probably at the size where they're going to get zapped. So keep in mind that your UV sterilizer will only affect your algae growth. It does not affect your fish health whatsoever. Certainly we recommend for most ponds to have at least a skimmer, better so to have a bottom drain. The skimmer is responsible for removing mostly leaf and other particulate debris from the surface of the water. These needs to be cleaned on a regular basis. If your pond is lucky enough to have a bottom drain, this will make all of your maintenance 1,000 times easier. And you can actually retrofit bottom drains into systems that do not have them. So don't think it's out of your options if you think you have to dig your entire pond up. It can actually be retrofitted using the pond that you already have. So now that we have the different pieces of the pond, we're going to explain all about pond maintenance. So why do we even need to clean our ponds? Well, water quality is essential to koi health, and this is for all fish. We do have a separate water quality webinar. It was our first webinar this year, and we certainly recommend that all fish owners take a look at that and understand all the different components of water quality. Just like the air we breathe contributes significantly to our health, the water that a fish swims in contributes significantly to their health. Now, some pond owners have a lot of plants and they figure that those plants are doing a really good job to get rid of all the nitrates. Well, yes, they will certainly eat up all the nitrates, but that's not all the only things that you're taking out with your water changes. Certain hormones, including those for stress and reproduction, can build up in ponds, especially in the late spring, early summer, with spawning and other disease processes. And it's very important that you're able to take these out of the pond to not cause your fish additional stress. The best way to go about this is just do it on a regular basis. We recommend putting it on your calendar and treating it as a priority. Same thing you would for the dentist or if your kids have any sporting events. This will really make it easy for you to keep up your maintenance on a regular basis. So how do I clean a pond? How do I do this pond maintenance? Well, if you have a very typical pressurized canister or bead filter, you need to do a backwash. And this essentially is running water in the opposite direction that you filter it in order to break up any pockets of debris and get the different little plastic bio balls moved around. This is usually a setting on any pressurized bead filter. We really recommend you do this at least once a week just to keep your filter operating correctly. Some ponds will need to be vacuumed, especially those that do not have a bottom drain. This is really where a lot of fish waste, extra food, plant debris is going to hang out right in the bottom. Certainly, if you have any substrate on the bottom of your pond, it's going to make this very difficult. Yes, we understand it looks pretty, but you really don't need to have any substrate on the bottom of your pond. If you do have any mats or beads that are not contained in a pressurized filter, these will need to be hand rinsed. And it's very important that you don't blast them with the hose. Certainly it'll make them look very pretty, but we always recommend that you just either gently shake them or rinse them gently with waste pond water. So sometimes if you're washing them with chlorinated tap water, you can blast them with lots of chlorine and kill a lot of those good bacteria. And we want those good bacteria to stay in those mats. We really just want the mats and beads to have good water flow. So shaking or rinsing with old pond water, do not blast them with the hose, do not make them pretty. So like we said, you can always use your excess water once you're doing your water changes to rinse your filter media and water your plants. Again, you have lots of nitrates in your water from all of the ammonia processing in fish, so use this to water your plants. We recommend that you don't use the city and chlorinated water to clean your filters, and again, never rinse them to sparkling clean. It'll make you feel better, it'll make your fish feel worse. Certainly, you can always consider adding aquaponics to your system. This will help cut down on the amount of water changes that you need to do. However, it will not take them out of your maintenance routine entirely. So aquaponics, again, we have another webinar on this, is using plants and in conjunction with fish systems to grow mostly vegetable plants, but certainly decorative plants will work as well. Keep in mind that the amount of plants that you have need to be significant in order to see any impact on your water quality. At least half of your system. And again, if you have fish in your system, it needs to be a separate system so your fish have lots of room to swim. So, how often am I supposed to clean my pond? Well, certainly if you can get to it weekly, that would be great. And again, it doesn't have to be a lot of maintenance every week. You can do your backwash, quick little 5-10 minutes, vacuum if you have to, and at least do all of this monthly. Again, it will depend on how many fish you have in your system and how your filtration is set up. We recommend that you have a checklist on what you need to do daily, such as cleaning skimmers and checking the fish, weekly, doing your backwashes, monthly, maybe cleaning some of your other filter media, and yearly, such as buying a new test kit and making sure that your vacuum is operating correctly. Now, the biggest question is, how much water do I change doing a water change or a backwash? Well, unfortunately, I can't give you a straightforward number. It's really dependent on your bioload, so the number and size of your fish. This lecture is pertaining to koi, but again, if you have other fish in there with koi, their conversion of feed to weight might be different than fish. Unfortunately, koi and their cousins goldfish really aren't that great at converting food to weight. A lot of aquaculture species are better at that. It also will depend on how much food and what kind of food they're eating. Certainly foods that have more protein will have more ammonia, and that's going to lead to more nitrates. And again, remember, nitrates can be just as toxic as ammonia at high doses. So feeding a higher protein food will increase your need to do water changes. Pond temperature, certainly since fish are ectotherms, their metabolism is reliant on the temperature of the surrounding water. So in colder water, their metabolism is going to be slower. Certainly this time of year in the winter, they're really not going to be eating much, so you don't have to do as many water changes as you usually do. When it warms up, obviously they're going to be eating, they're going to be reproducing, so they're going to be putting out a lot more products that need to be taken out of the water. And filtration capacity. Certainly we recommend that your filters exceed your pond volume. If this is not the case, you might see backups in your nitrogen cycle. And with this, you're going to need to do more water changes. Recommendations. We recommend 10% of a water change weekly. And again, this is backwashing is going to depend on the size of your filter and how your pond is set up, or 25% every other week. And again, this is just bare minimum place to start from. If you watch your water parameters, you'll be able to know how often to do your water changes. So moving on to koi health. How do koi stay healthy? Well, starting out with their different anatomical structures that contribute to their health, which include their skin and the mucus that is produced by their skin, the gills, kidneys, adrenal glands, and their senses, including their inner ear, chemoreceptors, and their specialized lateral line organ. So looking at their skin and mucus, just like ours, it's a physical defense to the external world. And this is really the primary defense of most anatomy in any species. Fish in general, including koi, also produce a mucus that lines the outside of their scales. It's what makes fish slippery, that stops the growth and spread of microorganisms, including viruses, bacterial, and different fungi. The mucus itself actually contains antibodies and bacterial killing cells. So you can think of when your fish are sick and they're producing a lot of extra mucus to kind of protect themselves. They're doing this in order to keep more microorganisms and pathogens from entering their bodies. Gills, again, their primary job is going to be exchanging carbon dioxide and other wastes, especially in fish, with ammonia for oxygen, same as our lungs primarily. You will see an increased rate of exchange when a fish is stressed. Again, they're going to start breathing a little heavy in order to get rid of all of these other metabolic waste products. Goes a little bit towards metabolic acidosis when a fish is stressed out. Again, they have to get rid of all those metabolic processes, mainly through the gills. And again, if you're not really that familiar with animal physiology, you really need to get rid of all of these metabolic wastes that are messing with your internal pH. And for fish, they're going to be excreting them into the external environment in order to make sure that their internal acid-base balance is correct for life function. Fish kidneys are a little bit odd to most veterinarians, let alone the general public. They do not have this lovely bean appearance that you would suspect. They actually lie directly underneath the vertebral column and are pretty much just a smear of tissue. It's not actually a discrete encapsulated organ. And they have two parts that are only distinguishable histologically, so under a microscope. The posterior kidney works the same way most other kidneys work, by removing toxins from the blood. The head kidney is actually responsible for hematopoiesis, so making blood cells, both red blood cells and white blood cells. The head kidney is also responsible for thyroid hormone production, and this is very important for growth. So you can imagine that if a fish is sick and not able to work their kidneys so well, they can have a lot of secondary issues. So again, since they don't really have true kidneys, they don't actually have true adrenal glands. They have a suprarenal organ that produces hormones associated with the stress response. And we'll be going into this a little bit later. But same hormones, you, me, cat, dog, horse, pig, sheep, goat, that's going to be the same stress response, and those come primarily from the suprarenal organ. And depending on the species, they have a couple other sites of production as well. So moving on to their different senses, fish do have ears. Certainly they're not external ears like ours. Most koi are actually large enough where you can see the little pinhole that is actually going into their inner ear. And these inner ears are very sensitive to loud noises inside and outside the tank and pond. Remember that water conducts sound a lot easier than the air. So this could keep in mind any pumps, radios, or cleaning equipment that you have close to the pond. The fish will hear that, and over time they can become very stressed out due to this. Fish also are able to smell different changes in the water. They don't have an actual nose. Certainly with koi, especially the butterfly koi, sometimes they have very long nasal folds that protrude from their nares. And everybody thinks it's a horrible growth or a tumor, but no, it's just their regular adaptation to have increased nasal folds coming out of them. I don't know if it makes them better sniffers than others. That's an interesting question. And then the fish's lateral line. So this is an external pressure sensor that allows them to feel vibrations in the water. So this is how your koi can sense that you are coming to the pond to feed them. They can hear you opening the side door. They can hear you walking towards the pond. They're actually able to distinguish different gates for different people. So if you have other people in your family who maybe don't feed the fish very much, they're very rarely out there, they're not going to have the same reaction that you coming out to the pond to feed them will have. Now, if any of you go back to Finding Nemo and the lovely Darla tapping on the tank, this is really where the fish are most stressed out due to the pressure on that lateral line, just that constant pounding. So then how do all of these different anatomical structures work into the fish immune system? Because again, we want to make sure that all our koi are healthy. Usually, a stress response in a fish is going to initially trigger a better, more robust immune system in order to fight off whatever the heck is coming into them. Over time, however, if you're constantly producing those stress hormones, especially cortisol, the system is going to become less sensitive to these hormones if they're constantly being put out, and they're going to lead to decreased effectiveness of the immune system. And again, this is from a chronic stress. So what was supposed to be just kind of a short-term stressor in order to get the fish into that fight or flight response, now the stressor has continued and the system is becoming less responsive to those different hormones. The fish's immune system works very similarly to other animals and ours. A lot of people don't give them enough credit for having an advanced immune system. So fish are actually able to receive vaccines because they do have memory cells that will recall up different pathogens they've been exposed to. So in fish, we have our lovely white blood cells and engulfing cells, and they actually exhibit the complement system and have antibody production, depending on what they've been exposed to in their lifetime. For koi, it's very important that they have a history of different herpes viruses, and we'll be covering some of these in a little bit. So as with their general metabolism, the immune system response is going to be temperature dependent. So when it's colder, their immune system isn't going to be operating as well as it could be. So certainly we're going to have more issues with diseases in the early spring when all the parasites and pathogens are able to replicate like mad, but then the immune system is still lagging behind. Now this is only true up until a certain point. Every fish species will have a sweet spot where their immune function is ideal. If you keep pushing koi up into the high 80s and 90s degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to have the same effect as if they were too cold. So unfortunately, it's going to mean their immune system shut down. The immune system is regulated pretty much the same as ours is. We have different neurologic tissue producing hormones. That's basically running the show here. And certainly there are many different things that we can contribute to that are going to disrupt the immune system in a fish. One of the more common ones that we see across the board in all veterinary medicine is heavy metals, pollutants, and drugs. So again, this is going to include all of the therapies that we give to fish for, say, other things. So a lot of our parasitic treatments, unfortunately, are going to stress the fish out and make their immune system not work as well. But we see a trade-off in order to get rid of those parasites in order to put them through the treatment. Certainly nutrition, if a fish does not have enough vitamin C and a little bit of vitamin E, their immune system is not going to work very well. So keep in mind that this vitamin is a water-soluble vitamin and therefore not shelf-stable long-term. We'll talk about that a little bit more in our nutrition section. Certainly water quality, poor water quality is going to be the most common stressor that we've seen in our 6 years of practice. Pathogens, obviously going to try to get in there and disrupt the immune system. This can include bacteria, parasites, and viruses. And viruses tend to be a little bit more effective on this than the other two. So looking at stress in fish, and again, stress in fish is going to be our most common cause of secondary problems, especially in koi. What exactly is stress? So it's an unfavorable influence causing a disruption of homeostasis. So certainly you can apply this to your own life. What makes you upset enough where it's going to disrupt your everyday flow? So certainly being stuck in traffic, your kids are fighting, your mother-in-law just showed up randomly. This can all cause you to be stressed out and cause your internal body to change and start moving in ways you might not expect. So you're going to have an initial behavioral response. Again, that fight or flight response. Do we want to try to get away from this stressor? Say it's another bully fish, or are we going to fight? Usually in fish, they're going to swim away. Unfortunately, they don't fight too well, and that's just the way they're equipped. There will be a secondary hormonal response. So again, all those neurologic tissues are going to be producing the cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. But again, when it's being pushed in the system and a fish continues to be stressed, say from water quality that's just terrible, you're going to lead to a chronic stress situation and decreased immune function. So again, we want to try to minimize stress in these fish in order to make sure they have the best health. And it's going to be very important as the water starts to warm. So counting as a source of stress. Certainly I could put water quality and leave the rest of this list alone. But again, there are more common causes, but for koi and other pet fish that we see, water quality is the culprit probably about 98% of the time. So if your fish are sick and they're stressed out, go check your water first and foremost. And then the overall environment. So we started off with our talk with, the whole overall pond environment. Is this appropriate for a koi, especially one that's maybe grown more and isn't the cute little size it used to be? What is the social structure of this pond? If you have koi that are breeding, the girls are going to get beat up during spawning season. And unfortunately, it's just the way that koi have been programmed evolutionary in order to breed. So again, social structure can stress out a fish. Handling and transport across the board, fish do not do well being handled. It's why we sedate almost all of our patients for their general exams. Just makes things easier, mellows them out, and certainly I don't have to stress them out trying to restrain them because as you can imagine, it's very hard to restrain a, 16-pound slippery missile. Nutritional deficits can certainly cause stress. Therapeutics themselves can cause stress, and certainly the other side of that, the pathogens, parasites, bacteria, and viruses. Now, how do we know if a fish is stressed out? Well, certainly you can see behavioral changes, the rubbing or flashing if there's a parasite, hyperactivity if, again, during spawning season. Jumping can be many different things. It can be parasites, it can be spawning. It can be a fish that just likes to jump. We've seen it before, and some fish just get the thrill out of it, I guess. Often we will see decreased body condition, so a fish that is skinnier than the other ones, and possibly impaired growth, especially for younger fish. Physical injury, obviously self-explanatory. Decreased fertility, say a pond that has spawned in the past and now doesn't want to anymore. Sudden death and diseases from other, bacteria, pathogen, parasites, and viruses can certainly add to stress. So now that we've come up with this very long list of different stressors in fish, how do we make sure that our fish are the least stressed fish possible? Well, number one, again, 98% of most of our cases is water quality. So maintain good water quality with regular testing. Buy a test kit, learn how to use it, keep track of all your parameters, and it will save you so much stress, let alone the stress of your fish. We really recommend to prevent overcrowding. Remember that cute little 6-inch fish could grow very, very large. If you do have bullies in your pond, and it does happen, it's important that they either be moved to another pond. Maybe you can swap with somebody who has bigger fish. And if you can, if you are having big problems with males beating up on females during spawning season, I understand physical separation is rarely an option. So again, it's not the best overall solution, but it's better than nothing. If you do have some fish that are shyer than others, or you have a big difference in size between your fish, make sure to provide adequate hiding spots that they can get away from predators and each other if they need to. And again, make sure that it's big enough for your big fish, or maybe have some that are small enough for just the smaller fish. And then if you do have a fish that is stressed out and zipping around their pond, make sure that you remove anything that they might hurt themselves on. This can be big submerged pumps, lantern materials. There's many different things that fish can sometimes swim into, especially if they're startled by, say, a predator, and this could make everything a little bit worse. So first things first, once you're able to identify your fish are stressed and the stressor that you think is the primary cause, certainly remove the cause of stress. And once the stressor is gone, treat all your sick fish as soon as possible. Make sure you know what they are sick from, and be able to quarantine your fish if necessary in order to prevent disease from spreading. We always recommend that you sedate fish if you're going to be handling them extensively, such as for a veterinary visit. and use safe transport procedures whenever possible. And again, this will vary on the size of your fish that you're transporting. Certainly the transport procedures between little tiny fish and giant fish will be very different. And we're happy to help guide you on this if you have any questions. Really, as koi owners today, you are being proactive about limiting your stress in fish. And it will lead to less disease, because obviously a fish that doesn't have stress has significantly better immune function. And with less disease, obviously you get healthier fish. With that, you get fewer calls to your fish veterinarian. So overall, I am saving you money from calling me out. Certainly, if you're able to decrease stress in fish, especially koi, again, water quality, 98% of most cases I see, this will be the best thing that you can do for your fish overall. So moving on to nutrition, and this is going to be specific to koi. We do have a separate nutrition lecture that's more general for other fish. So the primary diet of fish is protein. Secondary is fat, and not really on this list is carbohydrates. They don't like a lot of carbohydrates. We understand there are many commercial diets available. They use very fancy marketing tactics. If I hear anyone mention the word nucleotides to me again, I'm going to be a little upset, considering I don't think people even understand what words are on these bags. So ignore what is written on the bags. I don't care what color they are. Read the label and ignore the rest. So certainly, before we pick out a koi food, we want to identify the purpose of this fish. And there's really two main categories. Are they going to be a show fish or breeding fish? Or are they just going to have personal enjoyment? You like them swimming around the pond. The main reason we're going to denote this is that show and breeding fish will need more protein in the diet. Pet fish can have a lower protein. Certainly with less protein, they're going to have less growth. There's going to be more room in the pond, and your filtration won't be as stressed out. So identify which of these categories you fall into, and that will direct how much protein to get. Now, in addition to this, koi are going to be seasonal eaters. So the metabolism is going to mirror the water temperature. Again, koi are ectotherms. They cannot regulate their internal body temperature. So whatever the temperature of your water is almost identical to the temperature of the fish. At low temperatures, they're not going to have enough of a metabolism. So they don't need to be fed. High temperatures, they're going to be really, really hungry. So we're going to break this down in a couple different categories. So 50 to 55, very little to no food. And this will depend on how your pond is set up, what your fish's individual tolerance of their overall temperature gradient. Some fish love to eat at 55, others don't. And it's really up to the koi owner. You can throw in a little bit and see what they do. If they have no interest, go ahead and net it out and come back when it's warmer. From 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you can feed them a winter or maintenance diet, or you can feed a little bit of the summer diet. Again, overall calories, they're not going to have as many pellets to eat, but the overall protein will be the same. At above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, they can get the summer diet or winter diet. Again, remember, what is the purpose of your koi? Do they need those high growth diets, or could they get away with a maintenance diet? Certainly, if you're not sure, if you're on the fence, I'd just go ahead with the maintenance lower protein diet. We understand that all of these fish foods have expiration dates on them. However, these are only valid if the food is unopened. Like other water treatments, test kits, this is basically more of an indication to the store that's holding on to them when they need to update their inventory. Once opened, whatever bag of food, you have 6 months to use it up and then toss it. Again, those water-soluble vitamins, such as vitamin C, they start to degrade after 90 days in your fish food, and that's just as soon as it's exposed to air. After 6 months, you're essentially feeding the equivalent of cardboard. So once it's opened, You have 6 months, don't buy a bag bigger than you need to. It isn't worth it for the overall health of your koi. And again, remember, we're focusing on keeping your fish as healthy as possible. We recommend you store it in a cool, dry place in an airtight container, same as you would any cat or dog food. Make sure you keep it out of the sun. If it's out in the sun in an unsealed bag, it's gonna spoil faster. So same as your cat or your dog food, cool, dry place, airtight container. According to these rules, it really does not make sense to buy any koi food in bulk. Yes, I understand it will save you maybe a little bit of money. If you're able to split it with a neighbor that also has a koi pond, maybe that's a much better option to go to, provided you can get it in an airtight container. But it'll depend on how you have that set up. All right, we're gonna go through some different emerging diseases, and this is new to this year's presentation compared to last year. Starting off with koi herpes virus. There has been a significant increase in cases throughout the US in the last 2 years, and we expect this to continue. Clinical signs for this, unfortunately, are not very specific. We don't really see sunken eyes too much. Mucus coat is hard to diagnose, and gill necrosis can be several different things. With this disease, we do see about 80 to 100% mortality rate. So if this gets into your pond, everybody's going down. We see this in between 62 to 77 degrees is where this virus will be shed into the environment. And this can be a 7 to 21 day incubation period. And this is all, again, temperature dependent. So in warmer water, you're going to have a shorter incubation period. In colder water, it's going to be longer. And unfortunately, since this is a herpes virus, like all herpes viruses, just like chickenpox, once a fish is infected for life and can shed it back into the environment if they are stressed, which is why this lecture focuses so much on preventing stress in fish. The only way to keep this out of your system is to quarantine all new fish in between these two temperatures. If your fish is not in these temperatures, you're never going to know if they have KHV or not. But certainly if they are a carrier and have that in their tissue and it's too cold, they will not be shedding. Most importantly, with quarantine equals isolation. So you need to have a completely separate system that does not share any water or filtration. Any equipment must be kept separate. So again, if you're getting your fish from a dealer, you need to ask all of these very important questions. Not all dealers will know of this disease and or are testing for it, because there is testing available. There's 2 different types of testing. So the PCR is able to detect active shedding, and this test can be done before a fish is dead. We can take a little gill clip and send it off to the lab. The ELISA test is actually a blood test, and this can test for exposure to KHV in a past. So the fish would be carrying antibodies to KHV. And this is used to detect those carriers who are not showing physical signs and may never show physical signs, but could potentially give it to all of their new friends. If you want more information on koi herpes virus, we have a separate webinar for this and a ton of information on our website if you look at our Fish Health 101 section. Moving on to Carp Edema virus. This is also known as sleepy koi disease. This is a pox virus in fish. And really the main component of this disease is that if you have a pond that everybody looks dead on the bottom, and then you stimulate them with either sound, touch, or vibration, they all start swimming again like nothing was ever wrong. But then after a few minutes, they all sink back to the bottom of the tank. One of my colleagues has a pretty good video of this. It is up on the USDA website. So certainly something to be considerate of if you think your fish are all sick with this. Salt may help with preventing transmission. There's not really been any confirmed studies on this. There is absolutely no treatment for this disease at this time. There are tests available if you suspect that this is in your pond. We've seen cases in I think there's only been one in California so far and a few in the South, but certainly something to keep an eye on. Apparently this has been going on in Japan since the 70s, and it only just recently got to the US. So moving on to Hikui. This has been commonly called a red-eating worm. So it was thought to be a parasite for a very long period of time. Well, according to a paper that was published in 2017, this is actually a type of skin cancer in koi. It's a perivascular wall tumor, so it infects the cells around blood vessels. There's two different forms of this. There is a typical form, which infects, again, the red and orange pigment. That was, again, thought to make this a red-eating parasite. There is an atypical form, like this koi on the right here, that attacks any pigment. So this fish has white cells, black cells, and orange cells that are attacked. Thankfully, there is treatment for this, and this is actually treated with cryotherapy. Keep in mind that this is not going to be the same kind you can buy from any pharmacy. You really need the full strength liquid nitrogen. Our office is very busy in the spring treating these cases. Depending on the severity of the case, we might be able to clear it up. This poor little fish here has had 2 seasons worth of treatments and she's still not 100% cured. So something to consider in the future if we're able to catch it sooner. It is a lot easier to treat rather than some of these more severe cases. All right, and we will finish off our webinar today with Dr. Sanders' 5 secrets to healthy koi. You should all be able to guess number 1. Water quality, most important aspect of fish health overall. You want to buy a test kit and know how to use it. The API Freshwater Master Test Kit is the one we recommend. However, you will need to add KH test and a thermometer. We recommend that for any pond, you start testing daily. It's really great in order to reinforce how to use it. Move to weekly, and then test monthly. And this will vary, again, if you're going to be adding more fish or changing any of your filtration. We recommend that you watch your trends over different seasons. This will really dial you into how your pond operates. And if you're able to understand the different water chemistry changes that happen over a year, you will be far and away one of the better fish owners that we see. Water quality, I can't say it enough, is the most important aspect of fish health. If you want more information on water quality, we have a separate webinar on this topic as it is. Number 2, limit stress. Thanks to watching this webinar today, you are all experts in managing stress in koi. And how do we manage this? We maintain good water quality. In addition, we're going to avoid overcrowding. Remember that those cute little fish are going to grow into big monster fish. So keep in mind that you don't stuff them all in a pond and then have a big problem when they all get big. A lot of fish are going to be stressed from being either purchased or moved to a new pond. So if you're going to be purchasing any fish in the spring, we highly recommend that they go into quarantine, just to make sure that with that immune plummet from that handling, all those other parasites and bacteria, if there are there, can take hold. So certainly this is a reason to quarantine all new fish additions. Try to minimize noise from pumps and filters whenever possible. If you're able to keep them away from your pond, your fish will have overall health significantly improved. And tied into this is quarantine. Unless you know the exact protocol a fish that you are purchasing is going through, you need to apply your own quarantine. Many fish sellers are not aware of the different diseases, and what they count as quarantine, we have seen in person, is not adequate. So you need to apply your own quarantine whenever possible. We do have a separate webinar on this topic as well. We recommend a 4 to 6 week minimum quarantine, and this is going to be temperature dependent. So if the water is colder, it's going to be longer. But remember that that KHV of that 62 to 77 is critical for all koi. And it's very important with all quarantine that you focus on isolation. So you can't switch equipment between your regular pond and the quarantine pond. If you're going to be working at either pond, work on the big pond first and work on quarantine last, so you don't bring any diseases with you. Really focusing on isolation, and again, it's mostly the equipment transfer that's going to be tricky. We recommend you get multiple sets of equipment. If not, you really need to be careful on how you're cleaning it. Hot water and drying it out isn't going to be enough, and certainly if you will be bleaching your equipment, know the concentration of the bleach that you are using. They are not all created equal. Again, dialing into stress, we want to make sure our fish have proper nutrition. We have a high quality diet and a protein level that is appropriate for your fish. And this is divided between fish that are being shown or breeding and those that are just going to be your pets. Monitor your temperature, since a lot of the fish's metabolism is tied to the water temperature. Make sure that you store your food properly, out of the sun, airtight container, and replenish your stock every 6 months. Don't buy in bulk. It's not worth it. You're just going to lose the vitamin C. What can be hard for a lot of people is understanding when your fish is sick. We recommend that you watch your fish daily for any changes in appearance or behavior, and this really doesn't have to be any more than 5 minutes. I understand when they're not eating, it's not as fun to go out to the pond and check on everybody, but certainly you don't want to come out in the spring and realize that fish A has this huge giant lump on his back and we don't know how long it's been there. That will significantly change how we treat different diseases. If you think something is wrong with your koi, ask. And that means ask a veterinarian who knows what the heck they're talking about. Do not ask the internet. You're just going to ask for trouble. At the first sign of distress in your fish, check your water parameters. Remember, water quality is the most essential part of fish health. So if you're able to notice something's off in your water chemistry, you can do a water change and get everything back to where it needs to be. But this is something you can do without calling your veterinarian. We do have a separate webinar on spotting disease in fish. So that goes through the different behavioral signs of disease and the actual physical signs of disease in fish. And it's a little hard for some people to distinguish the behavioral signs. The physical ones of a hole, an ulcer, a bump, those are a lot easier. But again, it takes a little bit of practice, especially for all of your new koi owners. So that's going to wrap everything up today. For those of you familiar with our children's series, we put this together in order to get kids more interested in taking care of pet fish. A lot of pet owners we have today, they have fish, and a lot of disasters tend to happen with these first pets, and we really want to educate children and families in order to properly take care of their fish. All these books are now available on Amazon Prime, because I understand nobody likes to pay for shipping. For more information on koi health, we have our koi book on Healthy Koi Made Easy. This book is set up for anyone who has any interest in koi whatsoever. I tried to make it very accessible with lots of good topics. It covers everything that we covered in our lecture today. We have a paperback version that's $10. The Kindle, I believe, is $5, and they are both available on Amazon. So if anybody has any questions, I will filter through the tiny, tiny question box and do my best. All right. So this is a question: are we supposed to stop feeding koi if the water temp goes above a certain degree? So yes, absolutely. If your temperature is starting to creep up into the mid to high 80s and certainly in the 90s, I haven't really seen fish that really want to eat at that temperature. But yes, it's the same as a fish that is, say, too cold. A fish that is way too warm, unfortunately, their metabolism isn't going to work then either. So yes, above 85 into the 90s, I would hold off on feeding for these guys. All right. Is there such a thing as too many water changes? Yes, there absolutely is. So for most of our fish systems, we really don't want to be changing a ton of water at one time. Especially with koi ponds, you can have big changes in your pH when you leave the hose on for a very long period of time. Not to mention, you got to make sure you keep adding your dechlorinator. Certainly, if you're doing a lot of water changes, this is very disruptive to the fish overall, because obviously they see the water level starting to drop and get stressed out that they realize their home is going away. Again, since we are in this area of California, we haven't come across this issue because we know a lot of people are trying to conserve water. We're in a drought state here. If you live elsewhere in the country and you have access to lots of happy, clean water, really don't need to do anything more than once a week with a standard bioload. However, it's really going to depend on, again, all those points that we talked about of how many fish do you have, how big are they, what food are you feeding, how much protein is in there, how much waste is being produced by those fish, and how much your filter can handle in addition to any plants or algae that's using the food source. So again, with most of our tanks, we don't recommend more than 50% once a week. That's a lot of a pH change for some of these fish. But certainly if you have the water to do it, I'd just build a bigger pond. Question on cleaning nets and skimmers. So I'm assuming this is netting on top of a pond and skimmers that are skimming the top of the pond. So it really will depend on how much debris you get. If you have a lot of tree and leaf debris that's on top of your pond, it may need to be cleaned daily. Certainly I'd replace it if you start getting any holes that allow bigger particulates through either leaves or sticks or something like that. Because if they aren't caught in that skimmer, they can get sucked into your pump, and that's going to be damaging to your pump themselves. Still working on reading these questions. Sorry about that. Drop in the pond. Okay, so this is a question about a waterfall having a larger drop into the pond making noise. Should I change it just flowing into the pond? So, okay, I should have made, thank you very much for this question because it is a very good one to have. Noises that are being associated with normal natural ponds, such as rivers and streams, those noises the fish don't pick up on as much because, again, it's used to their, you know, if you think back to the common carp frolicking in the ponds, they actually use those sounds to know where the water is coming from and therefore where to go get the food. So a louder waterfall really isn't going to be picked up by the fish as, say, kind of an artificial noise like a pump or a filter. But thank you very much for asking that question. That's a very good point to make. All right, any other questions before we leave today? Thank you, these have been very good questions. All right, well, thank you everybody who joined us today for our webinar on koi health and keeping. If you do have any questions, we have tons of resources for koi owners on our website there, cafishvet.com. We have the Healthy Koi Made Easy publication, which you can get on Amazon. And you have all of our other social media there. So thank you everyone for joining us. This recording will be available for you to view at your leisure at a later date. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you all at our next month's webinar.